welcome. I'm so glad you can join us for this morning's discussion, and good evening to those of you in the United States, and especially in the East Coast, where all of our speakers are dialing in from. I am delighted that Asia Society Hong Kong can host this last program of our last business and policy program of the year today, and I'm the topic: Biden versus Trump, chaos, division, and unprecedented voter turnout. Really, what really happened in the November election, presidential election, which we are still kind of sorting through, but we're coming toward the end. Hopefully by January 20th, everything will have our new president sworn in. Tonight, we really have kind of an all-star cast. This is my dream panel. All three of you, I can spend an hour with very easily, and I will. I have a feeling in January with the election, after the presidential, the inauguration, I would love to have each one of you back and just talking about some of the issues that are of concern to you. I'm going to start off by introducing our speakers. Charlie Cook. Charlie has been with us many times. This is the fourth time he's with us. Charlie is the editor and publisher of the Cook Political Report and political analyst for National Journal Group. And he has co-authored the 2020 Almanac of American Politics. Basically, it's a biannual book widely considered to be the definitive publication analyzing U.S. elections. And also, Christine Chen is a founding executive director and current executive director of APIA Vote. She has 25 years of experience in really looking at AAPI community in terms of the elections and voting pattern. And I'm delighted. Christine is also a fellow Buckeye. So Christine, welcome from Washington, D.C. And somebody I've been dying to meet, Bakari Sellers. Bakari is a noted, is born into an activist family. His father, a civil rights leader, Cleveland Sellers, really is somebody that I've heard so much about, and I'm really looking forward to reading Bakari's memoir, which was published this year, My Vanishing Country. And Bakari is joining us from South Carolina today. And Bakari is also a frequent commentator on CNN, and he made history in the 2006 South Carolina State Legislature as the youngest African-American elected official at the age of 22. So we're delighted all three of them can join us this morning in Hong Kong to talk about this really unprecedented election. So I'm going to get started by inviting each of them to give us kind of 2 to 3 minutes their reflection of what happened with this election. And I'm going to start off with Charlie Cook. Charlie?
Well, thank you very much, Alice. And I'm sorry we're not doing this in Hong Kong, but hopefully in a year or so we can do this. This election, it was interesting. The results were a lot like what we expected a year and a half or 2 years ago, but not much like what we were expecting a month and a half or 2 months before the election. That if you had said that Joe Biden was going to win all 20 states that Hillary Clinton won, plus Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and throw in Arizona and Georgia, I could believe that. If you said that Democrats would pick up 1 or 2 or 3 seats in the Senate a year and a half ago, I could believe that. In the House, after a 40-seat loss, you would expect Democrats to pick up a few seats. But it was so different from what we had thought a month and a half or 2 months ago, where it looked like this thing towards the end or after a June, July period, when you saw President Trump take a real deep dive and seemingly bringing a lot of other Republican candidates down with him in June and July. And then again, for a couple of weeks after that first debate on September 29th, it looked like this thing could be a real runaway for Democrats across the board. And it ended up being a little bit closer than we thought, but the net results were pretty much what we thought at the beginning of the cycle. So it was a surprise compared to what it had seemed the last few months, but not so much from what we thought a year and a half or 2 years ago. I guess the only other thing I would say is that, and this is definitely not the conventional wisdom, but while I think that the United States, we are in the middle of probably the worst partisanship that we've seen since the Great Depression, since the Civil War and Reconstruction, I think that we may have a little bit of a respite in Washington over the next 2, 3, 4 years, that you may see the temperatures come down a little bit, that I think you're going to see a little bit more cooperation. I think with the relief package that you saw that Congress is getting through right now is a sign that we'll see a little bit of a standing down between the two sides. So I'm a little hopeful that there'll be a brief break maybe in the kind of partisanship that we've had that's really plagued our country so much over the last 20 or 25, 30 years, particularly the last 5.
All right. I'm going to ask Bakari, can you share with us your thoughts on the recent election?
So first, I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 whole stoplights and a blinking light. So my mom and dad always tell me that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words "thank you," and they're not nearly said enough. And so, Christine, I've never been on a panel with you, but it's a pleasure to be with you. Alice, I'm hoping my fingers and legs are crossed, and I'm hoping that my twins' fingers and legs are crossed as they're tonight, that we are able to get to Hong Kong pretty quickly. So just let me know. I only need a 24-hour notice, and I'll be at the Charlotte International Airport to fly over to Hong Kong whenever you need me. And Charlie, it's an honor. Utilize Gloria Borger and myself and Dana and many others utilize your research and information before we go on air often. So it's a pleasure. I think Charlie's analysis was dead on. Trump is a unique kind of boxer, to say the least. He's someone who comes out with a great bravado. He goes down early, but during the final rounds, he kind of comes back through and makes the fight close, makes it messy, and makes it a closer score on the scorecards than many people would ever imagine. I will say a few things about this race. Joe Biden, I'm somebody who supported Kamala Harris. Joe Biden is the only person amongst the 50 Democrats who ran for president who could have beaten Donald Trump. I think when we look back on the numbers, when we look at the analysis, we understand that Joe Biden, even at the age of 78 years old, was a unique candidate who fit this moment better than anybody else. I think if we look back at the data, we will see that if Donald Trump would have taken coronavirus seriously, doing things like simply worn a mask, Donald Trump would likely still be president today. But his inability to take that virus seriously really was detrimental to him. When you delve down deep into the numbers, and I don't mean to sound too much like my colleague Ron Brownstein on this, the biggest issue that my friends to the right of me have is that Republicans are gaining in places that are shrinking, and Democrats are gaining in places that are expanding. You're starting to see in these very small rural areas, Republicans just booming. You see Donald Trump win 2,000 plus counties. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Joe Biden won like 477 counties in the United States, and I may be off by 30 counties or so, 40 counties or so. But even with that, Democrats are winning these counties in these areas that are exploding, that are growing, where all the growth, where all the GDP is in our country. That's an important fact to understand. It's also where diversity lies in this country. And so for a very long period of time, there were many of us, including myself, who thought that the largest threat, and just political threat, to the long-term growth of the Republican Party were the leaders like Nikki Haley, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, et cetera. I think that Donald Trump probably set that clock back a little bit. This race was fascinating. And the last thing that I'll tell you is American politics is amazing because I think that but for a letter that went out 11 days prior to the election in 2016, we do not forget you, Comey. Just so if he's watching from his computer, we still remember you very well. And but for the death of the notorious RBG, as we call her affectionately, I think that the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and let me even say something a little bit more provocative, which I say and I get in a lot of trouble for. If Ruth Bader Ginsburg if she would have retired during the Obama administration, like many people thought she would, hoped she would, and should have done, this probably would have been a moot point. But her death 30 days out from the election saved the United States Senate for the Republican Party, as well as the fact that Cal Cunningham simply couldn't stop texting. So with those things, I appreciate you and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Bakari. We'll come back with, I have so many questions for you, but we'll now, Christine.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you to Asia Society Hong Kong. It's actually been wonderful to work with the Asia Society Network. Even before the elections, I was engaged with the Houston chapter as well, and it's such an honor to be on on this panel with Bakari and Charlie Cook. And it's great to continue this conversation because I think there's still a lot that we need to learn from this election because a lot of these lessons need to be thought through, and actually there's a lot of work that still needs to be done as we move forward. For API Vote, for those that don't know, we are a national nonpartisan organization that work with community-based organizations in 28 states to essentially mobilize Asian American and Pacific Islanders in electoral and civic participation. For us, going into 2020, we knew there was going to be a lot of work because 2020 was special because not only did we have a presidential elections and the primaries, and heading into that, we had 3 Asian Americans candidates for that were vying for the presidential race. But also it was the 2020 census time period. And so we knew there was going to be a lot of work, really focusing on getting trusted messengers and community-based organizations that were already taxed to do a lot of this work. And then with that came the pandemic. And many times these same nonprofits are the same groups that are doing all this work at the same time, right? But at the end, we are so excited to see that, just even looking at the 2020 early voting data, there was 300% increase in Asian American early votes compared to 2016. In every single battleground state, their API early vote turnout surged by more than any other group. And, it caught the attention because I think this is something that people were not necessarily paying attention to, especially with the elections being so close. We also made headway in terms of elected officials and with that and battling really at the same time disinformation that is going to continue on. We saw for us, because we're nonpartisan, we were focusing on disinformation about the voting process and the integrity of the American election system. But we also saw what was happening in regards to the candidates, but in terms of how this is also going to impact our work around organizing around issues such as supporting affirmative action and disaggregated data. And with that, we know that we need to do a better job and actually continue to expand our reach in these in-language spaces on WeChat and Kakao and WhatsApp to ensure that we're able to inoculate and push back on this disinformation that will actually continue on, whether it's elections season, but I think it's going to be more around issues that we care about as we continue to work with our lawmakers to really pass the issues that we really want to support overall. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back, and then I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, all 3 of you. I can spend an hour just talking to each of you because I'm such a political junkie, as Christine know, because I grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, and I have my first election. I remember my first election figure was Barbara Bush. So I am dating myself here. So I know, and I know I've shared a panel once, 2008 with Charlie Cook here at Asia Society talking about my home state of Ohio, which I'm passionate about. So I'm going to ask Charlie now about what happened with the landslide. I mean, I remember you, Charlie, were the last in-person speaker we had here in Hong Kong in January 23rd, 2020. And we at that time we had heard there was something happening in Wuhan. And in fact, I think, Charlie, you got out kind of just in time before we heard all about the virus, the COVID, now known as COVID-19. And you had said, I remember very clearly, and around then, that there was 50% chance that the nominee, the Democratic nominee, was going to be Joe Biden. And at that time, as I recall, there were so many, and Bakari said, there were so many Democrats, and Biden was not doing well then. And you said 50%, I think 20% Bloomberg or something like that. But I want to, between January, I feel like it's a lifetime ago, and it really was, thanks to COVID. I mean, January seems so far long ago. But what happened from January until November? And we know from the news from George Floyd, the anti-Asian discrimination. There's so much stuff which I will come to later. But the polls toward the end, kind of made the same mistake that 4 years ago. They kind of didn't predict it. I mean, what happened to the landslide that it was going to be sweeping the Democrats? Can you talk about that, with your long history of polling?
I mean, this race was a little closer than I thought, but I don't think you ever heard the word landslide coming from me, because this country is too narrowly divided, not evenly divided, but too narrowly divided for anybody to win by a landslide. I mean, the days of somebody getting a 10-point win like Ronald Reagan did over Jimmy Carter in 1980, the day of the kind of 1964 Johnson Goldwater landslides, we can't have those anymore, because they're going to be 90% of Republicans are going to vote for a Republican candidate no matter what, and the same thing for a Democratic candidate no matter what. You can't have those kinds of landslides today. But I think part of it is that I think there was some movement back in the last week or two, back towards Republicans, both at the presidential and back a little bit. I think some of that, frankly, was an acknowledgement that that President Trump was probably going to lose, and a bit of cold feet on the part of some independent voters, undecided voters, that they were willing to give Joe Biden the keys to the car, but not necessarily a full tank of gas and a credit card. That I think they were a little unnerved by a lot of the talk of socialism, the Medicare for all, defund the police, abolish ICE. A lot of these things, they pack in the Supreme Court. It was a rejection of Donald Trump, but it wasn't an across the board rejection of the Republican Party. And I literally think they got cold feet. But I think some of the mistakes, the people, some of the fault line that people are giving polls, I think, is a little bit rough, because when you ask people about 2016, they say, well, the polls were all wrong. And I'll say, well, how are they wrong? And they'll say, well, the poll said that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And I said, well, show me a poll that said she was going to win the Electoral College, because polls don't do that. National polls don't do the Electoral College. They just do the popular vote. And they were 1 point off. In this election, what I think happened was the polls were pretty much dead on in terms of the Biden vote. Where they were off was the Trump vote. And I frankly think you saw the undecided vote break very, very strongly away from Democrats at the end, and particularly down ballot. And that basically the undecideds broke one way. And we've seen that happen before, where undecideds, people tend to concentrate on, well, somebody's 5 points ahead or 10 points ahead or 2 points ahead. Well, the thing is, pollsters are not, they're not mind readers, and polls are not crystal balls. They can't tell you what the undecided voters are going to do. And they went overwhelmingly, as it turned out, for Republicans and for Trump, that narrowed the gap up. But Joe Biden got basically within a point or so of what the polls said he was going to get.
Well, Bakari, I wanted to ask you about the House. We were expecting, I mean, in watching all the coverage here and all the landslide. The House. What surprised me most was about the House. It did not, the numbers. The Democrats lost House seats, and your home state of South Carolina was also very interesting in terms of, Senator Graham. I have friends here who have never given money to American friends who have never given money to political party, but they confessed that they gave money to Senator Graham's opponent during the election, and we saw that election was going to be close. So, can you kind of give us an insight on that? Also the House, the lack of, the Democrats did not do that well.
Yeah. So first, let me talk to you about South Carolina. Next time y'all want to give money in the South, call me first. I ran statewide in South Carolina in 2014. I raised about $750,000, $800,000 back when you could run for lieutenant governor and governor separately. I got 42% of the vote. I was outraised by a very good friend of mine, Jamie Harrison, by about $108 million, and he got 43.5%. So for extra $100 million in South Carolina, you got 1 point and some change percent of the movement. What that means is that South Carolina is not quite Georgia, very far from North Carolina, ain't nowhere near Virginia. And you have to understand demographic trends. You have to understand where the electorate is. You have to understand who's voting, why they're voting. And Lindsey Graham made a very calculated effort early on, which paid off. And Lindsey Graham, it's funny. When I was in the General Assembly, I served for about 8 years. I was very close to Lindsey because we had Lindsey Graham and Jim DeMint. And so you weren't getting anything out of Jim DeMint. So everybody went to Lindsey Graham. He was a great, great friend. He ended up becoming something like a pilot fish. And when I refer to that, I don't mean it as condescending as it sounds, but it means, as somebody who stays extremely close to some of the larger sharks, whatever it may be in the ocean. For Lindsey, it was John McCain. When John McCain passed, it became Donald Trump. And Lindsey made a very, very early decision that he was going to stay extremely close to Donald Trump. And it was the best decision that any politician has made in recent American history. Just nestle as close as you can. Donald Trump was going to run 54% in South Carolina. Lindsey ran, a percent or two behind him. So it was a very calculated, very, very strong decision. Jamie ran one of the best campaigns we've seen in South Carolina, but we are not some of these other southern states. We're not in the Sun Belt that people talk about often. We just aren't there yet. So that's kind of first about South Carolina. In terms of Democrats not doing well in the House, I think even Charlie will tell you that, look, all you need to do is be up one vote in the House and you get the speaker. So you don't have to be up 50, 60, 70 votes. That's good. That cushion is good. And as someone like myself who supported Deb Haaland for Secretary of the Interior, which is one of the most, and we don't talk about this enough in mainstream media, Deb Haaland is one of the most consequential picks of any president of the United States in a cabinet. I'm the person who will tell you that cabinet picks don't mean a whole lot. You can't go back in history and tell me like these extremely outside of the big four. Let me just quantify this. Outside of the big four, you can't tell me the cabinet picks that have actually, impacted American history to that point. But Deb Haaland is one of those. She is the first Native American or indigenous cabinet official we've had ever. And she's over the Department of Interior. It means a whole lot. For Nancy Pelosi to actually say that she was willing to allow that majority to go from 3 at the time, because you had Marcia Fudge and Cedric Richmond down to 2, meant a whole lot. It really did. And so, Democrats didn't necessarily just knock the lights out when it came to winning the House again, but they still are in the majority in the House. So Democrats have the majority in the House, and they have the majority in the, not the majority, they have the executive branch, where Democrats lost a lot, which we haven't talked about, which Charlie, I think, and Christine as well will echo, is that the most devastating things the Democrats lost were state legislatures and state legislative seats. And the reason being is because this is the year for redistricting. And so these losses will be exacerbated because we didn't do well there. The only other thing I'll say, which is a non sequitur, because you didn't ask me this question, nobody really brought it up, but I have to push back on Charlie a little bit. Democrats have won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes in this country. This is an unheard of stretch for any political party. Donald Trump only got 46% twice. Let's not forget that. And I'm not a Democrat who says abolish the Electoral College. You got the wrong Democrat up here. I think if the Electoral College was good enough to elect a tall, skinny guy with a funny name like Bakari, except his name was Barack, then, let's not try to throw it out the window like today, because we don't necessarily like the results. But we actually have won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes. Joe Biden won 51.6% and won this race by 7 million votes. And I promise you this, there was no political pundit before this who included Arizona and Georgia. And if you did, then, all praises to you. But I don't know anybody who predicted Arizona and Georgia falling in the Democratic column. There were a lot of states, including Florida, and people talking about Ohio, which I didn't give any credit to, people talking about North Carolina, people talking about Iowa, but nobody would give you Arizona and Georgia. That's a feat, and I think we need to recognize it as such.
We had them both as such.
Well, Charlie, you want to respond to that? I mean, what surprised you? You've been seeing this for a long time, but what surprised you the most?
Yeah, no, if you look at, let's take presidential first. And you say, we had 24 states listed as lean, likely, solid Democrat, and every single one of those went Democratic. We had 20 states lean, likely, solid Republican. Every one of those went Republican. But what happened was, in the toss-ups, basically Republicans, Trump won every single toss-up except for Georgia, every single state. And in the US Senate, every single race that we had rated as lean, likely, solid Democrat went Democrat. Every one that we had lean, likely, solid Republican went Republican. And Republicans, putting the Georgias aside that we don't know yet, Republicans won every single one of those toss-ups. So that sort of gets back to what I was saying earlier, was that you had the basically undecided voters broke. It's not that Democrats dropped. Now, in the House, there were some upsets. I mean, where Republicans won every single toss-up in the House, and they also knocked off a couple of state or districts that we thought were going to go Democratic. But that's the only place where there were actual upsets. But for the, in the presidential, Joe Biden's his mission was very simple. It wasn't necessarily easy, but it was simple, and that was hold on to all 20 of the states that Hillary Clinton won, plus the District of Columbia. Then win the 3 that she lost by 0.8 of a point or less. And that's all he needed. That would get him 278 electoral votes right there. Now, the other, after the second 3 in terms of the big battleground states were the Sun Belt ones, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina. We had them all 3 rated as toss-ups. And then there was the extended battleground, which was the Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, Texas, and towards the end, we'd moved Georgia into that toss-up category as well. So this was not upsets; it was a matter of everything that was close. Just about everything that was close broke towards Republicans. And again, I think there was it was like it was like people getting skittish. It was like a fish going for a lure. And just at the last minute, something spooked them. And I think that's exactly what happened. But you never heard me talking about a landslide. I mean, because that was just never going to happen. But in the House, if you went back and looked at what we were saying 2 years ago, when a party loses 40 seats in the House, they usually get some back. And it requires something pretty ugly to happen for you not to at least win some of them back. But that June, July period where you saw Trump take his big dive. And then again, then he regained some altitude back in August, early September, and then another dive after that first debate. Those two periods, it looked like he was going to suck down a bunch of other Republicans. So it did look like it was starting to move back the other way. But you never heard landslide coming across my lips, because I don't think that's possible given the polarization that we have today.
And one of the things now I want to turn to is, I think Bakari already touched upon it, really was the impact of COVID. In January, Charlie and I, when we spoke, I think COVID was beginning to rear its ugly head. But I wanted to turn it over to Christine, because on May 26th, we had done a program about COVID's impact on the anti-Asian discrimination. So when we were doing this program, I think with some people who have some Asian Americans who are really concerned about the anti-Asian discrimination you're seeing because of the COVID. And I know President Trump had called it the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus. So in May, we saw that. In fact, I find it very interesting when the program we did on May 26th, it was also the same day that George Floyd was killed, arrested and died tragically. And because he was arrested on the 25th, but the time different. It was, in fact, I went back and constructed within the day when we did our anti-Asian discrimination program. The next day, we heard about the George Floyd incident. So, Christine, I wanted to talk to you about that. I mean, how has that impacted? And I also want to bring that back to Bakari. How has COVID and also Black Lives Matter, as well as the anti-Asian discrimination, kind of changed the picture from, I mean, without COVID, I think Bakari is probably right. Trump would probably have won the re-election. So, Christine, talk about that. And I see Charlie shaking here. We'll come back to Charlie about that. But I'm really interested here in Hong Kong or here in Asia, where we heard about COVID first. How has that impacted the Asian American voters? And talk about in your situation in the APIA vote. People think about Asian American voter as a monolith. No, it's quite diverse. Same thing. I think there is a bit of a difference too with the African American voter, maybe not to the same extreme. But talk about the Asian American and the impact of COVID.
Yeah, I think the combination of COVID and the rise of anti-Asian sentiment, and also the organizing around Black Lives Matter, really helped our community really understand how elections matter. I think in the past, we had to spend a lot of energy really educating and discussing with potential voters about why their vote matters. But this time around, we actually needed to only focus more about the mechanics and about their early voting options, because people were highly motivated. API Vote, since 2012, we've always conducted a pre-election survey every 2 years. And our 2020 Asian American Voter Survey noted that 54% that said that they would prefer to vote by mail or by absentee ballot. And this was already in the summertime when they were noting this. But a lot of that is because of the pandemic, but then also the fear of even going out. We were hearing anecdotal stories about issues of safety. And so they were also trying to figure out their other options in terms of voting as well. I also would say that because a lot of people, when they think about what happened in Minnesota, they don't actually realize that there's a large Asian American population, especially the Hmong community. And what had happened was actually seen as happening also in some segments of the Asian American community. And so because we're in a pandemic, I thought that the conversations around Black Lives Matter and why it's a concern that we also need to champion and work side by side with other communities of color it was actually more meaningful because younger generations were in the same households as their older generations were in the past. When this had occurred, maybe they would have a quick conversation. If there was a disagreement, they would just go off on their own ways. But this time, being at home all the time, there was actually lots of opportunities to have more thoughtful conversations and deeper understanding of what this actually would mean and how it impacts all of us. And so I think all of that actually drove us in terms of the understanding of the elections, and then also our understanding of why we need to like also go vote early. Also, according to our survey, when you're asking about like where we land, because we are quite a diverse community. My organization, we have nonprofits that work with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and it really ranges. But overall, according to our survey, even once again, back in the summer when this survey was conducted, 54% of Asian Americans were supporting Biden, with 30% Trump. And then ultimately, when you look at the post-election surveys, what Biden did was actually went ahead and was able to increase his support by gaining on the undecided. In the summertime, we saw that the largest undecided population was at 22% with Chinese Americans. And that what that also tells me is that both Democrats and Republicans still need to do a better job in terms of continuing to engage this Asian American Pacific Islander growing electorate. That it can't necessarily just be like 4 to 6 weeks right before the elections. Especially now as we're looking to hopefully continue the trend of early voting, where people are going to be making their decisions on a regular basis. But it's also now the challenge that we want to tackle is, okay, now with this growing base and new base of new voters, can we go ahead and get them involved with organizing around issues, with redistricting, and also getting them to hold their elected officials accountable? Once again, what we also found in our survey is that 34% of our voters also identify as independent. So even though that they may have supported Biden, that doesn't necessarily mean their support is down the ticket, because a lot of them still don't necessarily understand about or identify with Democrat or Republican or conservative or progressive. It's really about their relationship with individual candidates and what's happening there locally.
Bakari, can you, I want to kind of turn to you now to talk about the impact of Black Lives Matter on this election. It happened, end of May, and we have, and it wasn't just the United States. I think I was struck by the movement. I think when it went across to Europe, and to a certain extent here in Asia as well. So talk about that, how, and also really brought out, I'm sure, the African American community in droves. And but if you can, from your perspective, and also your book came out around May, and kind of talk about that story, your journey, and how the Black Lives Matter. It is one of the biggest story of this year, not only for the United States, but really like COVID, it's a global story.
So let me just say that anyone watching who wants to write a book, the only advice I can give you is to not have that book released during the middle of a pandemic. That's just that's my truth. That's about all I can tell you about writing books. Now, my book came out May 19th, and it just happened to be at a time where we were having a conversation about race in this country after Breonna, after Ahmaud, after George Floyd. And so it's quite interesting. There are a lot of people who analyze this as a moment when there are many people like myself who understand that this is a movement that crosses over generations. My father was one of the founding members of a small fledgling organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. My father's a part of the Emmett Till generation, right? So, and this is ironic because I just saw that that Ebony magazine was purchased out of bankruptcy today, but Emmett Till in 1955, his brutalized face was placed on the front of Ebony magazine. My father was one of those people whose activism was spurred because of that. Black Lives Matter as an organization gets, a condemnation from left and right, whether fair or unfair. I don't really get into the meat of that discussion too much. But what I do like to talk to people about is the fact that it's a phrase and it's a movement generating mantra that many people ascribe to. I mean, I would not dare say that Mitt Romney is a member of Black Lives Matter, but yet we saw Mitt Romney actually utter the phrase. I mean, the approval rating over the last 7 years has gone up from the low teens to, 60, 70% for those individuals who just believe that this is the fact that we're having to have this discussion in itself is patently absurd. But I mean, it just tells you where we are in the discourse about race, not just in the United States, but around the world, that Black Lives Matter. Like, people are asking for like the bare minimum. I'm not saying that my life is exceptional. I'm not asking you to put any more value. I'm just asking you to say that like we matter. And so that's where that starts. COVID is unique though, because they had to happen together, because COVID has ripped the Band-Aid off the systemic inequities we have in this country. When you look at the groups from a public health and economic perspective, which are disproportionately affected by this pandemic, you've seen that it's been African Americans and indigenous peoples. Those are the two largest groups that have been affected by this virus. And I just believe that people's eyes were open. That's first. And second, 8 minutes and 46 seconds is a long time to put your knee on somebody's neck. And I just firmly believe that the consciousness of this country, I mean, I use Carson Wentz, who at one point was a starting quarterback and now is a backup. I use Trevor Lawrence. I hate Clemson football, but he is the starting quarterback for Clemson. And I use Taylor Swift. I'm a big Swiftie. I think that Red is her best album. Many people will disagree, but I'll die on that hill, who all utilize their voice, because people just can't fathom that inhumanity. And Black folk for a long time have been saying that this is representative of, maybe not my experience, but one degree of separation from our interaction. And so you need to kind of understand this. And people were able to see it in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, again, to put your knee on the neck of a human, let alone a dog. And I've always told people that all Black folk have been asking for a long period of time is just the benefit of our humanity. That's absolutely it. And so, yes, it played a role in this race. You saw Donald Trump try to tap into it. You saw him uniquely. I don't know. I don't think that he is necessarily. I think he's gifted in bringing the media and camera attention towards him. But I'm not certain that he is the one who pulls those political strings, because I think that the way that he bastardized the movement and made it images of, burning down cities versus, wanting. And even though everyone will tell you that, I've never met anybody in Antifa. Like, I just ain't never, as a Black person from the South, I've literally never met anybody. I'm the furthest thing from Portland, Oregon. But those became the images of the movement. And I just think that was just from a pure political science perspective, was a gifted way to push back on something that he was decently insensitive towards. He made a lot of mistakes, walking over to a church and holding a Bible upside down, having an inability to talk about race relations with any type of empathy. All of those things really matter. But I still believe that, at the end of the day, even with these things, 2020, and I'll wrap up on this point. 2020, and I'm interested to hear Charlie's thoughts on this. 2020 is probably the most unique year in American history, because you had a wild convergence of 1918, 1919, flu-like pandemic. You had a 1928, 1929 economic depression, recession. You had a 1968, where in 68 you had the Orangeburg massacre, where my father was shot and 28 others were shot as well. You had April 4th, the assassination of King. You had June, the assassination of RFK. You had soldiers coming home from war. Tom Brokaw calls it boom, because the country was on fire. But you had all those things happen in 1 year on top of a presidential election. I mean, that is, first of all, that's the best year to be a TV exec. Second, that's a wild year to just be an American citizen. So I think most people are just taking a deep breath and saying, we made it through 2020. Thank God. Let's just get to 2021. But I love to hear other people's take on this year. And I just think that COVID and the mishandling of this administration and the number of deaths that were avoidable is the lone reason that we're at this point that we are today.
Well, I think you're so right. You captured 2020. We still have 7 days left in 2020, and a lot can happen between. In fact, as I recall, I think even Charlie mentioned it in January of this year that the election is not over until January 20th because a lot of things can happen when the president is still in the White House. And I kind of want to turn it back to Charlie for that, to kind of talk to what Bakari had just talked about. And then opening up for question. We only have about 10, 15 minutes left, and we have quite a few questions coming in from our audience. But Charlie, kind of 2020, I mean, in January when you were here, was a very different United States as well as the world. But impact of COVID, impact of Black Lives Matter, how has it been on the election? But your reflection on 2020.
Yeah, it's a lot to shove into a couple of minutes. I think the only thing that I really disagree with Bakari is about the impact of the coronavirus. I mean, well, obviously it's an enormous event and a horrific event, and tragic event. I don't think it changed the structure of the presidential race one bit. That prior to the pandemic, Trump was running 4, 5, 6 points on average behind Joe Biden, and he lost by 4.4%. Right? I mean, it didn't. I think clearly being off the rails and his behavior and attitude at the task force news conferences, was harmful. But I frankly think that the economy going down, and although nobody blamed him for the economy going down, but it took the wind out of his sails. That arguably the only strong point he had was a good economy. And you take that good economy away from him, and that took away basically the essence of the argument for his reelection. So I actually don't think the coronavirus really affected the impact of the race at all. I think it's remarkable that such an enormous event really I don't think affected the race much at all. The thing is, on the Black Lives Matter, when the spotlight was on police brutality, police excesses, the police dealings with minorities in general and African American men in particular, and Black Lives Matter, then I think that was something that was very, very harmful to President Trump, because it sort of exposed his insensitivity to just sort of who we are as a people. But when you saw the demonstrations and the 99.95% of the people out there that were peaceful, that were moms and dads and kids, and moms and dads pushing strollers and all of that, that was really, really powerful. But it was the 0.5% that went into the arson, the mayhem that was out there. And whoever the moron who came up with the phrase defund the police, that was probably worth 5 or 10 House seats right there. I mean, if the Black Lives Matter movement wanted to do something else constructive, they would find whoever coined that phrase and banish them from the movement. Because, I mean, re-steering, reprogramming money into into counseling, I mean, absolutely. But defund was just one of the most clinically stupid political statements I've ever heard in my entire life. And whoever did that must think that words don't matter, because they clearly can and they clearly do. But I think President Trump was going to have, I think, a very difficult time getting reelected anyway. Now, the truth is that his strategy, a lot of us thought that it was a mistake for him to ignore swing voters and to basically ignore independents and all of that. His strategy clearly was you dance with the one that brung you, that it was some really, really angry, bitter people with a lot of grievances that came out in big numbers and elected him the first time and came remarkably close to electing him a second time. But I don't know. I don't know that the coronavirus really changed the outcome of the election. I mean, it was basically what I was thinking when I was in Hong Kong was pretty much what seemed to have happened. But there were times that it looked like it could blow big. But I do think that it was the concern about whether Democrats would not rein in, would they protect the peace? And, if anything, where the numbers seem to move, we're out in small town rural America. The places that would be the last place on the planet touched by demonstrations and violence of that kind. I mean, it kind of reminded me of 1968 when Nixon was running against crime in the streets, and the polls were showing that the people that were reacting most strongly were people that lived out in rural areas where there were no streets, for God's sake. But they were the ones that reacted so hostilely to it. But anyway,
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, and we have to ask about Georgia. Several of the questions from the audience is about Georgia. Georgia is January 5th, the runoff election. So I would love to get started. Christine, talk about, I know Andrew Yang was supposed to have moved to Georgia after the presidential election. Talk about the impact of API votes. It would, make it a difference. And then Bakari, also, you kind of talk about Stacey Abrams. I'm really interested in terms of the African American, the future politicians like yourself, and how will that, I think we need young people to be involved in politics, and this year we certainly have gotten them out. So I would love to hear from both of you, Christine and Bakari, talking about the younger demographic. But let's start off with Georgia. Christine?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize, but it's really about the combination of all the communities of color in Georgia that's really changing the demographics. And when you are also looking at the changes of the suburban neighborhoods, you cannot ignore the Asian American electorate. Once again, just even looking at the early vote numbers from November, we early voted by 120,000, which in comparison to 40,000 in 2016. And so heading into the runoff, a lot of the nonprofits as well as the partisan organizations are really strategizing and focusing on early vote. One, I think a lot of people are just like, they just want to get it done and over with. So there was a lot of strategies and implementation of getting out our mailers early for API vote and Advancing Justice Atlanta. We translated our mailers into 4 different languages, reached out to 160,000 households. And a lot of it is really focusing on early voting, getting the language assistance and utilizing the hotline. So that way they know what the process and the deadlines are. At the same time, I do know on the partisan side, there's been a lot more activity of targeting Asian American voters, where they are focused on canvassing operations. So it's no longer just about phone banking and mailers, but and also texting, because I think people are starting to get tired of all the texting that they're receiving, especially when you're in a battleground state. So that door-to-door canvassing has really been important for a lot of these C4 and PACs that are targeting these communities.
You're on mute, Alice.
Oh,
Alice,
you're on mute, Alice.
Okay, sorry. Bakari, we're going to have you say a few words. I know you have to leave us at 12:30, but kind of give us your reflection.
So Georgia is going to be interesting. I don't know if Georgia is going to be like 2008 Indiana. That kind of petrifies me. I actually think it's probably going to be more like that than anything else. Indiana was a state that people thought was moving in the direction of the Democratic Party. And in 2008, people forget that Barack Obama won that state, good margin. It corrected pretty quickly. So we'll see what happens. The hope that Democrats have is that the last special election we had around a holiday season such as this fell in the laps of Democrats. I don't think anybody would have thought that we would have a Democrat elected from the state of Alabama. That race was on December 12th. This January 5th election is starting to kind of line up eerily like that one with the turnout that we're seeing. Stacey Abrams is a fascinating historical figure. I mean, she is a luminary. She's brilliant. I'm a good friend of Stacey Abrams. She's somebody who, when she got beat, she still continued to do the good work and did the grassroots work. I think that the question that people need to ask is not about Stacey Abrams, though, because she does great work and she does the work that's needed. I think the question that needs to be asked is about Brian Kemp, because I think Brian Kemp is someone who you see when you talk about the infringement on voting rights, the stagnation of people participating in the process, a lot of the things they're doing on the ground now. Brian Kemp and Scott Walker harken back to a day that was not good for this country. And, regardless of however you may feel about their leadership as governor, I'm simply talking about voting rights. And I think that an examination of Brian Kemp's record on voting rights is something that history won't look kindly upon. So let me just end where I began, which is to say thank you for having me, Alice. I'm not coming back to an event like this unless it's in person in Hong Kong. So, we just we got to do whatever we got to do, because I look forward to seeing you guys in person soon.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Bakari, for joining us. And we're going to transition to our private discussion. I know Bakari won't be able to join us, but I want to thank him personally. You will be invited. We look forward to welcoming you here in person. And next year, we are, I think 2021 is going to be kind of like this year for the first half anyway, but we are determined the year 2022, when we celebrate our 10th anniversary here at Asia Society. By the way, I think some of you already know the architect who designed our building, Billy Sin and Todd William, is also currently very busy working on the Obama Center in Chicago. So I know we will be excited to share this place with Bakari, and I know Charlie will be back, and Christine has already been here. So we do look forward to welcoming all of you back in person. I think what's happening in the United States, it is really it's. I'm very proud to be a Chinese American in terms of seeing the development in the United States. The institution has really stand strong, and we have come out of this year still in one piece, despite all of the differences and all of that. And I know it's not going to be easy with COVID is still among us, but light is at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine on its way. We're hearing that all throughout here in Asia as well in the US and Europe. So 2021 will be better than 2020. And although this is our last program of business policy program of the year, I know this topic is still very much something that we want to explore. And I'm going to make it my mission to invite each of you back and spend an hour with you easily. And those of you who wish to join, since you can't travel anyway, and if you want to tune in and have these type of discussions, I welcome you to your participation, because Asia Society Hong Kong, this year is our 30th anniversary. We started at a time when it was troubled here in Asia in 1990, aftermath of 1989 in China. And 30 years later, as an institution, we are still here and strong, and thanks to all the support of our members and supporters. So I think I want to wish everyone a really happy, healthy, and safe new year. And 2021 will be better in 2020. And again, thanks our speakers. And then we will migrate to our private discussion where some of you still have wonderful questions for Christine and Charlie, and we will have another half an hour discussion. But those of you who are signing off, thank you all for your support. Without your support, we would not be where we are today. Still very strong and it getting stronger. This year, we just tallied, thanks to, well, due to COVID, our program numbers. We did a program the other day where we had 150,000 viewers from Baidu, China. So our tally went from 300,000 views to 450,000 views year end 2020. So that is a number that we're particularly proud of. And the entire team here at Asia Society Hong Kong and the Asia Society Global Network has worked so hard. We're definitely a global organization. And I want to thank all of you for your support to get us to where we are today, and have a wonderful, safe holiday season. Thank you.